So, today we're diving into the story of Clare of Assisi. She was a 13th century noblewoman who made a choice that was, well, pretty wild for her time. She decided to live a life of what's called radical poverty, and from behind the walls of a cloister, she kicked off a revolution of faith that really did change the world.
Okay, let's just start with this really powerful exchange, because it gets right to the heart of Clare's story. For decades, the church, we're talking popes who are her actual friends, kept pushing her to accept property, for her own safety, but she just wouldn't do it. This quote, it just perfectly captures that tension between her absolutely unshakable vision and the concerns of, well, the most powerful institution on earth.
To really get our heads around Clare's choice, we need to take a look at the world she was born into, and just how radical her decision was to walk away from it all.
So this slide, it just lays out the stark contrast, right? In the 13th century, if you were a noblewoman, your whole identity, your security, it was all tied to property. Your value is basically your dowry. Your future was an arranged marriage designed to bring more land and power into the family. The whole system was built on owning stuff. And Clare's choice? It was a complete and total rejection of that entire world. She wanted only one thing, which she called the privilege of poverty. I mean, it's just so countercultural you can't even imagine.
And when we say radical poverty, we're not just talking about living a simple life. No, this was something else entirely. It was a complete refusal to own anything. No land, no buildings, no endowments that would generate income. The only way the community survived was on alms they received each day. For Clare, this wasn't about making life hard for the sake of it. It was about finding spiritual freedom away from all the worldly distractions.
An idea this powerful, it doesn't stay quiet for long. And sure enough, it started to attract other women. They were drawn to her vision, and a whole new kind of community started to take shape in this little rundown church called San Damiano.
And what she built, it was genuinely revolutionary. Inside the walls of San Damiano, that rigid class structure of the feudal world outside, it was just gone. Noblewomen and commoners were totally equal. They lived together, they worked together, and there were no ranks or titles. They thought of themselves as a family, and the work they did was a service, a gift they gave away freely, not some business to make money.
And then there's this incredible story. Clare had this powerful vision where she looked into a mirror, but instead of seeing her own reflection, she saw the faces of all the women who would one day join her, rich, poor, from all over Italy and beyond. And this wasn't just a dream, it literally came true. Her example inspired so many others to come and seek out this new way of life.
But of course, when you try to build something this different, even if it's behind convent walls, well, it's never going to be easy. Clare's vision faced huge challenges, from church leaders who doubted her to actual enemy soldiers threatening to burn the whole thing down. And this really gets to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? This was the question that hung over San Damiano for decades. In a brutal, unpredictable world, could faith alone actually be enough to keep a community going? Pretty much everyone, from cardinals to generals, had their doubts. So the first big test, it actually came from inside the church itself. A man named Cardinal Hugolino, who was a friend of Clare's and would later become Pope Gregory IX, he saw her refusal to own property as just reckless. He really pushed her and her sisters to accept a more traditional setup that included owning property.
And you can kind of see where he's coming from, right? His argument was just pure practical concern. He saw property and stability as the same thing. Without a solid financial footing, he was convinced the community was basically doomed to fail.
But Clare's answer, it wasn't about budgets or spreadsheets. It was a straight-up declaration of faith. She quoted scripture back at him, rejecting the whole idea that earthly security was even necessary. For her, real security came from God, and owning property was just a distraction from that kind of absolute trust.
Okay, so you have this theological back and forth going on, and then boom, a real life-or-death threat shows up at their door. An army of mercenaries hired by the Holy Roman Emperor laid siege to Assisi, and the very first place they attacked was the unprotected monastery of San Damiano, just sitting there right outside the city walls. I mean, you just have to picture this. It is an incredible scene. Soldiers are literally climbing over the walls, and Clare, who was sick at the time, has her sisters carry her right to the gate. She's holding the Eucharist, and she confronts the attackers with nothing but a prayer, basically putting her community's survival on the line, publicly in God's hands. And then, something incredible happens. The soldiers, terrified, just turned and fled.
So she survived decades of doubt, she survived a military attack, and now, the final chapter of her life begins. It becomes this race against time to secure the future of her vision. Not with walls or with money, but with words on a page.
And then, her closest spiritual friend, Francis of Assisi, who had started this journey with her, he dies. And you can imagine, that was just a devastating blow. She was truly on her own now. But instead of breaking her, it just hardened her resolve to get her unique privilege of poverty officially recognized and protected by the church for good.
What an ending to this fight. I mean, just look at the timing here. As she's literally on her deathbed, the Pope himself comes to visit her, which was a huge, huge honor. Then, on August 9th, the papal bull finally arrives. That's an official decree, sealed by the Pope, the highest approval you can get, and it finally approved her rule. Her life's work was done, and just 2 days later, she died, victorious.
These were her last words, and she was speaking them to her own soul. I mean, listen to that. There's just no fear there. It's just this profound sense of peace. She had fought her battle, she had won, and now she was ready for that final journey, completely confident in the faith that had guided her whole life.
So, at the end of the day, what did she leave behind? Not a castle, not a fortune, but an idea. An idea of a different way to live, a different kind of community. And that idea has endured for more than 800 years in the order she founded, the Poor Clares, who are still continuing her work all over the world today.
And this quote, from the document that made her a saint, it just perfectly captures the beautiful paradox of her life. Here's a woman physically hidden from the world in a cloister, but the light of her conviction, the power of her ideas, well, it was just too bright to be held in by walls. It shone out and influenced cities, popes, and history itself.